Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining me again today. And today we're going to talk about reactive toxicity. I will start with a story and then tell you about my own. So reactive toxicity is when, as the name implies, is when you are with a toxic person or a narcissist person, and then you start changing from being the kind person, the loving, peaceful person that you are as a form of defense against the toxicity that you're facing. And I know about this firsthand because I was that person who became toxic reactively from being with a toxic person. But I'll tell you a story first. So when my dad died, one of his old childhood friends just, reached out to me and was really, really nice and kind and fatherly towards me. And he will call me, check up on me, make sure that I was okay, will pray for me, and even offer to mediate when my marriage ended. And I was like, no, daddy, no, don't do that. So I don't want to go back.
It was at this moment that
Anyway, he's really, really nice and kind. And one day he said to me that his daughter was coming over from America, and that he would like me to take her under my wings and help her to settle down. And he talked so glowingly of his daughter, and he was like, Omobolanle, please, when she gets to London, please take her under your wings and show her around and help her to settle down. I was like, say no more, sir. And then she came, and then we talked on the phone, we chatted, and then we decided to meet up for dinner. So we had dinner in the city, and then I was thanking her, and I was like, oh, thank you so much for your dad. Bami Dupelo Daddy, he's been really, really lovely and nice and kind, just like my dad. And she was like, And so I was like, oh, he's so proud of you. He just keeps on talking about your achievements and this and that. And she was like, yeah, that's my dad, the knack. I was like,
That's so crazy.
Shocking. The knack, okay. She said, yeah, that's my dad. He's very nice and kind outside, but inside, he is a really, really toxic person. And for the longest time, I thought that it was both my parents that were toxic. But now I know that my dad was the toxic person and that my mother became toxic in defense and in reaction to being with a toxic person. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Anyway, it's a good thing that your mother stayed on, because they divorced when she got into college. Like most marriages are, they stay on till the youngest child gets into college to provide stability. So I said, well, it's a good thing that she sacrificed, that for you to have stability. She said, no, it's not a good thing. That growing up with toxic parents is not a good thing for a child. That so many times coming back home, she would be scared coming back home. It was a terror coming back home, because she wouldn't know what she'll meet. She'll come home to see two parents screaming and shouting and breaking things on themselves, and she couldn't bring friends home because she didn't know what what would be going on at home. If her friends came around, it would be so embarrassing for them to see her parents, shouting at each other like that. And they didn't care wherever they were, outside, inside, they would shout and curse each other out and, do all sorts of really, really toxic things. And she said, no, she wishes that her mother had left and not stayed. That now, knowing her mother now, that her mother has gone back to how she was before, which is a really calm, loving person. And she wishes that was the mother she knew when she was growing up. She wishes that her mother had left her dad and she had lived with her mother, and she and her sisters had lived with their mother and grown up to know a peaceful childhood, a serene childhood, instead of the destructive childhood that she grew up to know. And that it actually put her off marriage, because that was the model she knew of marriage, and she didn't want that for herself. She wanted to be single if that was what marriage was about. So yeah, why stay on with a toxic person? Why become reactively toxic? Because of the children? It's actually counterproductive. Now, I said that I know this firsthand because I became reactively toxic as well. And it took me a couple of years to get back to my default setting of being peaceful and calm and conflict avoiding. So when I met my ex-husband, I was peaceful and kind and everything, but he seemed to get a high from conflicts. He'll just imagine something happening, something that never happened. He'll just imagine it, and from there he'll escalate it into a conflict, and he'll start shouting at me, and he'll just imagine things. He could just come up and say, that man smiled at you. Why did he smile like you like that? And from there it will just escalate. And I'll be like, which man? And be like, stop lying, Okuronier. And he will just manufacture things. He just seems to get a high from conflicts. And sometimes if we'd had some peace and loving for some time, I think something will tell him, oh, this woman is so peaceful, this woman is enjoying. He'll just start again to give me hilo in the early days. And so one day, the day that started the reactive toxicity for me it wasn't like 0 to 100. No, it was like 0 to 1 to 5, and then till it became like 100 towards the end. So that day he had come and we were gisting, and he was telling me about how his ex-wife, how he toasted her with so much money, and he was so intentional, took her to expensive places, traveled around Europe, spent weekends in expensive hotels, took her fine dining, none of which happened with me and him. So I was like, so you mean a cheap girlfriend? So I'm the cheap girlfriend. You are lucky with that. And I was like, no, I don't mean you are the cheap girlfriend. I'm just saying I'm happy that you are not expensive like that. I was like, Joe, if you miss it, Joe, means I want to be expensive. Means I want to go to an expensive hotel for the weekend. And that was how he just flared up, That's how I just started shouting, what is wrong with you? I was like, I'm sorry, I was just joking. No, he was not having that. He just started shouting. And I kept on apologizing and pleading and begging, and he went off. It was my flat, my home, my house. He went off. And then when he went off, I went upstairs to my son's room, and I saw my son crouched in his room and shaking. I said, Toby, what's wrong? And he said, Mom, you love Uncle too much. I was like, what do you mean I love Uncle too much? I love Uncle. Uncle loves me. She said, no, you love Uncle too much. You love Uncle more than he loves you. I said, why did you say that? Why did you say that? I said, because every time he shouts at you, he screams at you, and you keep on apologizing, and you keep on begging him, and he doesn't listen, and he keeps on shouting and screaming, and and that day was like a scale fell from my eyes, and I saw myself the way my son saw me. And I thought, no, I'm not going to be a weak mother. I'm not going to be a weak woman. I'm not going to be a template of weak womanhood. And so from that day, I started learning how to give it back to him, Bass for his boost. And then later I became Bass for his boost, and then I became really, really verbal. I knew how to say the most hurtful things. I knew how to write the most hurtful things because he had been really, really hurtful to me. Imagine, he would call, when we were dating, he came, and this particular day we'd had fun, I'd cooked for him. I always cooked with my money, never with his money. He never put money down. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about on another episode, financial abuse. He was using my money. And then that day he was leaving, and he was like, was like, don't think that because you are great in sex and you know how to satisfy me, I can't leave you if I want to leave you. I'll leave you if I want to leave you. Just out of the blue, just like that. And there was another day he came, I'd run the bath for him. He soaked himself in the bath. I'd, bathed him like a baby. I used to pamper him so much. Bathed him, scrubbed his body, toweled him, dried, moisturized his body and everything. And then I said, okay, Lomaje, because I think I cooked 2 things. I was like, Kilomaje, and I was like, Onje woni, onje olomo se, onje to ma se tan taya mama rinyan, to ma dabi en pe keyan lo si, keyan wa buka lo jẹun. Like, what food? What do you know how to cook? the food that you cook, and after eating, one will be irritated and one would feel like going to a buka to go and eat out of the blue, just like that, such toxic things. And I remember one day he said to me that "Ila olega jo neri elo." I didn't know what it meant, but I know that it couldn't be a nice thing. So I asked my uncle, who's very versed in Yoruba, and he said, "Oh, it's a servant's master thing. It means that the servant can never be as high as the master, and that ila okra, the okra tree can never be taller than the farmer. The farmer is your onire. No matter how tall the okra tries to grow, the farmer will always cut it down. Can never be as tall as the farmer." So this was him saying that to me, and I didn't tell my uncle what it meant. But hi, baby. So yeah, so things like that, not nice. And so I became reactively toxic over the years. And unfortunately for me, I did not contain the toxicity. See, I didn't use your table. That's what I'm here to do. I didn't touch your I didn't touch your table. Let me just finish here. So I didn't contain it to just him. It now spilled over to my sisters, my friends, even my son. Sometimes Toby even still says to me that, "Mom, why did you say this?" I would support the husband even when I knew that he was being unfair to my son. For the sake of peace, I'll support him, and I would see the pain, I'll see the hurt in my son's eyes. And once in a while he talks about it. I'm really, really sorry about that. But yeah, and even my sisters would be like, society change, sister Abe Sherikoni, this is not how you were before. This you are not as kind as you used to be. Uncle Tunde has changed you, marriage has changed you, you've changed for the worse. And even friends too, they'll be like, this is not the sis B that we used to know. Yes, I became reactively toxic, and thankfully I'm back to being the peace loving and conflict avoiding person that I'd always been. Now, anything that's harder than banana, kotobaju, banana alone making, anything that is harder than banana now, I don't eat it. So I ask, is it worth it staying on in a toxic marriage, in a toxic relationship, and becoming reactively toxic because you are defending yourself and exposing your children to a toxic childhood? Remember that they can't have two childhoods. Once they've had that childhood, that is it. You are giving them the template for marriage, being a toxic marriage, being toxic. So they might either decide, like my dad's friend's daughter, decide that marriage was not for them because it's toxic and too stressful, or they might think that toxicity is how marriage should be. Well, you might be lucky to have, well-adjusted children, but how are you going to have well-adjusted children when you are bringing them up in a toxic situation? So if you have been a victim of if you have been a reactive toxic person, please comment and let me know. And if you've enjoyed this, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and like and share. So I asked a few women. I put this post up and I asked women who had been reactively toxic. And so one lady said the day she knew that she had to leave her marriage was the day she almost hit her husband with a shovel. And that was not her. But because of his toxicity, she had become increasingly toxic and became, and that when she had been verbally toxic, but the day she was going to be physically toxic, she knew that if she didn't leave that marriage, somebody was going to die, and she didn't want it to be her. And another lady said that there was a day she was advised by her friends to pretend that she had traveled, and she pretended that she had traveled and she hid in one of the rooms. And the moment the husband came back from home, from wherever he went, he called his side chick and told the side chick to come over, that the stupid woman had traveled. And she rushed out and beat the living daylight out of him. And that was when she knew that she had to leave that, she had to leave that marriage, because before then she had been verbally abusive. And then the day she beat him, she knew that he had gone beyond verbal abusive and she was now physically abusive. So that's another thing. A lot of women, a lot of men as well, because this is not gender specific, a lot of people also become physically abusive in defense of the toxicity they are facing, the verbal toxicity, or even the physical toxicity. They start beating each other up. And if you have children, that is not a good environment for your child to grow up in. So please, live to live. I'm not saying live to live, not just because your life is in danger, but because you're setting a bad example for your children. You're giving them a bad template of what marriage is. Marriage, you should let them know that marriage is peaceful, marriage is calm, and that it's also okay to not be in a marriage if the only marriage that is there is a toxic one. It's very, very okay to walk out of a marriage and be on your own. October is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. Domestic violence is not only physical. Economic abuse, psychological abuse, coercion, verbal abuse, these are all recognized as abuse in various countries, and a lot of countries have domestic abuse laws to protect the victims. Please speak out and seek help if you're a victim. Live to live